Thanks, everyone. Come on in. Great to see all of you. So I want to tell you a little bit about my passion, especially for Latin poetry. A lot of this can apply to ancient Greek, but I'll kind of focus it on Latin for now. And I think I must have been reading some chapter of Don Quixote when I thought of the subtitle here. It's a little bit on the long side, but what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about the connection of how, when we speak Latin, how that can actually make us better readers of poetry and vice versa. When I was preparing this, I thought of one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, in this episode, Captain Picard is stuck on this alien planet with this alien. Now, he can't communicate with him. Every Starfleet officer has a communication badge, though, which is also a universal translator. And it's working. It's translating things he's saying. But Picard can't understand the alien. It's translating words like and at, but otherwise these place names or people, Darmok and Geladet Tanagra, the alien keeps saying, as well as a number of other things that Picard just doesn't understand. What do these things mean? And the reason the universal translator can't work is because all the things that the alien is saying are taken directly as metaphor from the alien society's literature and mythology and poetry. And so this is, in the classic sense, the non-modern sense, meme. This is a meme, the imitation, like Juliet on her balcony. What's that an image of? Love. It could be love, passion, desire. And that's how this alien species communicates. And Picard eventually, he struggles, doesn't quite understand, but eventually he does figure it out, and look how happy it is. And he's like, and then he says, Darmok and Geladet Tanagra. The other's like, oh, you got it. It's because the alien can't communicate in that more kind of fundamental or simpler way that Picard has to communicate in. And it's this amazing example in science fiction of exactly what we preach, a lot of us as teachers, which is input, the input method, learning through listening and hearing. Because he's stranded on this planet, he doesn't speak the language, he can't communicate in it. But by the end of the episode, he's able to communicate to all the aliens when the rest of his crew on the ship are completely baffled. He comes and he talks to them using all the metaphors that we also, as the audience, got to learn. So it's very interesting. So it's a really cool language learning experience. Now, speaking of meme, we have a modern sense for that, which is this imitation and reference. And it's a really important part of modern culture, as it always has been. And it's so interesting to see how the idea that Darmok and Geladet Tanagra, almost like making them kind of a band. And which is also interesting because, in my opinion, Star Trek: The Next Generation, that's good literature. A lot of it is really well written, especially that episode. And it is worth remembering for that reason, and worth imitating, worth having as a part of our daily communication. So like if you meet a Star Trek fan and you say something like, Darmok and Geladet Tanagra, they'll be like, you're in. Now, what is our equivalent to that? Well, one of them might be good old lefty, Skywula, Gaius Milcius Skywula. And as you may know, the story, one of the most famous ones in the legendary history / mythology of ancient Rome, he goes and he tries to assault the Etruscan king. He fails, and so they take him, and they're going to probably kill him, but they're like, hey, what the heck are you doing? You're this one guy trying to infiltrate our camp, and you killed the wrong guy like a total idiot. And he puts his right hand in the fire, and it burns away, and as he says many famous lines, one of which is, Romanus sum civis, Gaium mucium vocant. I always imagine it's like Sylvester Stallone's voice in my head when he says that. It's a Gaium mucium vocant, and it's like, you can't hurt me, And that's his name, Gaius Milcius. And then he gets, of course, the cognomen, the nickname, Skywula, lefty, because he doesn't have the right hand anymore. And that's our kind of meme, right? Where we take these lines from literature, because that's useful. The way Livy writes this, Gaium mucium vocant, there's no reason we can't use that in certain situations for ourselves. Lucium Ranierium vocant. It could be conversational, or it could recall this exact scene and sound like kind of like a tough guy thing. Romanus sum civis, decimum helvidium rufum vocant. Now, when it comes to actually using conversational Latin. That's something that a lot of us have been doing today, or we strive to do, we want to do. What kind of examples should we actually imitate? Now, there are some really beautiful, and I'd say tempting things that we might be careful of. And this is one of them, which is the so-called hermeneumata, or interpretamenta, meaning translations, dual translations of Greek and Latin, basically a phrase book from 3rd century, 4th century AD. And it's really interesting, and I have learned a lot of useful vocabulary from it. But at the same time, and I discussed this too with Dr. Thunberg, who's here, of course, at Paideia this weekend, some years ago, and he said it is really interesting, and it shows us a lot about how the language works, especially in like later imperial times. But what we're after, the reason we speak Latin, it could be, for some people, it could just be like a really cool hobby. But for most of us, it's about getting inside the literature, about being able to access it more like it's our native language. Or, for example, I'm not a native Italian speaker, but I speak it well enough to appreciate the literature. Because speaking Italian is something that I do every day now, and so when I read literature, I can appreciate certain nuances that are the higher literary stuff that's what's meant to be appreciated by native speakers more easily than if I were coming at Italian entirely from grammar translation. So the issue then with this is it's not exactly the right dialect or idiom. We want more classical idiom. Now, what we can do, it's something I really like to do and recommend, is looking at poetry, and I'll show you why. And I'm going to take a few lines from Virgil's Eclogues. So, for example, this one, quid facere. So, what should I do? That's pretty useful. It actually happens in 2 Eclogues, so it happens twice, which tells me that this is probably a pretty useful conversational thing. Now, there are certainly poetical usages that happen in poetry that might not be exactly totally, quotidian prose speech, but I personally have nothing against the usage of poetry that we take from classical literature and we use in our daily speech, because this is the idiom that we want. We want to be able to read the poetry, even if there are elements of artificiality in classical Latin, whether in the poetry or the idiom. That's the idiom we want, and it ends up being our teacher for this classical Latin thing that we've been cultivating basically for 2 millennia. Now, the thing about this, which is great, it's a very useful phrase, quid facere, is that since it's in meter, poetry ends up being a guidebook to correct pronunciation. Now, when it comes to pronunciation, we just use whatever convention we want, and I am completely fine with that. However, there is a utility in being able to follow the most important aspect, in my opinion, of Latin pronunciation, which is the phonemic vowel length and phonemic syllable length. And why? Because if we recite prose that way, if we try to speak that way as best we can, then when we pick up a poem, we just read it the way we'd read a poem in English, if we're English speakers, and we get the rhythm, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? I can hit the stresses right, because I'm a native English speaker. Even though my accent is different from that of Shakespeare's, which would have sounded something like, should I compare thee to a summer's day, or something like that, the more Shakespearean pronunciation of the 1600s. That's okay, because the fundamental characteristic of Shakespeare's language, of his English, and mine, is that we have the accents, we have language where the stress accent is still important. Because that's not true of every language. Take a Frenchman, for example. French doesn't naturally have stress accent in its words. So a Frenchman, he can absolutely read that same line from Shakespeare, but it'll come out something more like, should I compare thee to a summer's day? And I'm just using a caricature of an accent. But ultimately, since French native speakers do not have stress accent in the words, there's no lexical stress accent, it's a phrasal accent, they aren't able to appreciate English literature or other literature that uses stress accent in its poetry without certain training. So this is why I think this is so important in Latin. So with quid facerem, and we could use ecclesiastical pronunciation, quid facerem, same thing. I do think this is important in any version of Latin recitation, but we could all do it now. We can be think of a conversation where we're telling somebody, oh, we're there, couldn't find parking anywhere on 5th Avenue, quid facerem. And now your turn, quid facerem. Fantastic. Quid facere. And there's the stress pattern. And another line, non equidim video, miror magis. Of course, here we see this, it's often called elision, or synaleiphy is a more technical term, the merging of two syllables together. So equidem and in video, equidem video, equidem video. Everyone try that. Equidem video. Beautiful. So altogether, non equidem video, miror magis. This miror magis is just like, I'm not envious, I'm just astonished, I'm just surprised. I really love the miror magis, and I've used that myself in conversation in Latin. I really like it. Miror magis. Everyone try it. Miror magis. Miror magis. Beautiful, and it's that long, long, short, short. And, or short, long, depending, it's anceps. And what could you do? Maybe you're in a similar situation as Meliboeus or Meliboeus is in that first eclogue, and you might actually throw this into conversation. But you could alter the words if you just wanted to keep the meter to play with it and say, non equidim video, laudo magis, or something like that. Now, you don't have to do that, but it's the kind of fun thing you can do to help internalize and make these lines of poetry that you like a part of you, part of your idiolect. Here's another one. So, Paulo Maior acanamus. So this is the beginning of the fourth eclogue, one of my favorites. And it's, instead of talking about all this pastoral things, let's talk about this amazing prediction or this prophecy that I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about things that are maiora. Paulo Maiora canamus. Paulo Maiora canamus. Let's try that. Repeat after me. Paulo Maiora canamus. Beautiful. Wonderful. Paulo Maiora canamus. So we could also insert that into conversation. I challenge you, if you have this situation today, yokora molto, which means all jokes aside, all kidding aside, Paulo Maiora canamus. Maybe you ask somebody how your friend, how he's doing, how she's doing, and they say, they might make up some crazy story or something like that, and you joke and you say things, but but seriously, you want to really know how the person's doing. But yokora molto, Paulo Maiora canamus, utualent filiaeque. It's one way you might be able to actually insert something like this into your conversation. So the idea is that if we follow this pattern of long and short syllables, which is inherent in the poetry, then the more that we read poetry, we'll recognize similar lines, similar patterns, and it'll become more natural. So Latin is alien for a number of reasons, obviously the vocabulary and other things, but this whole structure of how the words work, English doesn't work that way. Italian doesn't work that way. German doesn't work that way. Finnish does, Czech does, Japanese does, but unless you know a language which has this phonemic vowel length thing really well, it's something that we have to, it's not easy. It's not easy for me. It's something but I think it's super valuable. Here's one we could definitely find a way to use today. Hukades. Hukades. Try it with me. Hukades. Beautiful. Hukades. Absolutely. And as far as if this is something that's interesting to you and something you want to do, what I would regard as being the incorrect way to scan this, to give you an idea of what I'm saying, it would be something like hukades. I would expect, for example, an Italian to say it like that. Normally, I would say hugades, because they're not thinking of the length of the hook, and normally stressed vowels and open syllables, especially in two-syllable words like this, usually get lengthened in Italian. So hugades, and I would regard that. I mean, it's fine for communicating in Latin, and it's great. But this other level that I'm proposing, being of value, is that if we do it in the scansion, we get this guidebook to then further apply to prose and then to how we speak. So think of someone, you're like, you'll see them at the coffee hour, and you're like, and try. So hukades. Beautiful. It's fantastic. And this one's, I think, pretty useful too. Quod nunc se pro ripidille. Where the heck is he off to now? So I'll try it and repeat after me. Quod nunc se pro ripidille. Quod nunc se pro ripidille. Very good. So yeah. Now, obviously, I'm also being quite measured how I'm reciting these now. I'm trying to give the same long or same amount of seconds, if you will, or fractions of a second for long and short syllables. But what this means, this long and short thing, is not like it's always some like specific, like 1 second and half second. No, it's just relative. But it's a good way to start out if this is something that you're not familiar with. So you may know this. Omnia vincit amor. What does it mean? Love conquers all. What does it mean to you?
Like literal translation?
Well, yeah, what does that mean? How would you use that?
I don't know, I guess.
Anyone else? What does it mean to you?
I really need to eat that piece of cake.
Because as you love, right? Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Any other ways you might use it? Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe you're having like an argument with your partner or something like that, and then you seek counsel from a friend, and your friend says, don't worry, love conquers all.
Outstanding. Great. We have a very positive sense with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's our meme. However, that's not how it's used in the 10th eclogue, if you're familiar with it. It's actually used almost ironically and in absolute defeat. Poor Gallus. He's been highly wronged by his ex, who has gone off over the Alps to follow some soldier. And at the end of it, he says that the god Cupid screws over everybody. That's more like the meaning. That's a bit more of what I get out of it. And maybe I'm exaggerating the opposite direction a bit much, but we could still use it. So you could and you should, if you like it, and it means this positive thing to you, do use it that way. Omnia vincit amor. Beautiful. And yeah, so it's interesting. So, and this is another, they didn't fix the line there. I will skip the next one because I wanted to do this one. Speaking of this ex who went over the Alps, he says, this is the line, if I were to cite it in this kind of, in a more regular sort of way, te ne frigora laedant, just kind of singing through it. This is Gallus, and he's really upset at her. He's going off, and he's saying to her, literally, oh, may the cold not hurt you. But it's not, it's not like with his lilac, like, oh, may the cold not hurt you. It's like, that's not how I hear it in my head. I hear it like this. Yo, I hope you don't catch a cold. He's upset. He's really angry at her. I think of like Bill Burr or, I don't know, Joe Pesci, who's like, don't let the door hit you on the way out, sister. That's sort of what this which is great. It's visceral. It's something we could use ourselves. Maybe for joking. Hopefully you don't actually want to say this in a real situation, but you can still use it for a joke, right? So scanning it. Te ne frigora laedant. Yeah, he's not happy. And then it gets even better. He says this later. Yo, I hope the ice don't cut the dainty bottoms of your feet. He's upset. He is very angry at her. And let's try this one. It's a little bit longer, but maybe we can do it together. No. Oh, you're doing so well. But let me... But making me nervous. Let me go first. Then you can. Okay. Tibine teneras glacies secet asperat plantas. Beautiful. Speaking of Star Trek, that sounds like the Borg. That's very cool. That's very cool. And that's great. So what is this method to kind of summarize? What I think is, I love the eclogue, so I like using those phrases and a bunch of others. But whatever you like Catullus, you like Horace, you like Plautus, you like Apuleius, there you go. And especially if it's poetry though, in verse, then you can actually use this. So then if you learn the scansion of the line, you may have also heard of or even used a method where you move the accent in order to figure out where the beginning of the foot is. That's an artificial thing that, I'm trying to think when that came up. It was some hundreds of years ago. And it's a way to help us, who if we speak natively Italian or German or English, a way to understand where the beginning of the metrical foot is. But it really doesn't have anything to do with how the poetry was recited. And also it can obscure a lot of the beauty in the rhythm, because a lot more interesting things that happen if we use these long and short syllables. Which again, not easy for us, but I think highly worthwhile in doing. So learning the right scansion of it, then memorizing it, like huka desu. You probably remember that one now, huka desu. That one's good. And then find opportunities, if you can, to use it. Maybe today, hey, look, we're at a convention where we can speak Latin to each other, or Greek for Greek speakers too. And then you're probably going to have this effect if you do this regularly. If you then incorporate this into your prose reading, that you'll be able to actually notice similar patterns of scansion that exist in other poems that you'll read. So here are the lines again. I don't know if you want to use any of these, you can take a picture. You're welcome to. If you want to try to use these today. There are better examples too. These are just ones that I happen to like myself. And see if you can use them at some point today, because I think they're pretty valuable. But moving on, if you didn't get a picture, I can show this again to you later. But so again, what are the benefits of this whole thing? Well, we get to internalize the good classical idiom, the thing that years ago Dr. Thunberg taught me, that it's not necessarily that hermeneumata, that phrase book from the 3rd or 4th century that we want to imitate for our conversational Latin, but this literary prose, this dialect that we're cultivating and trying to internalize and read better. Maybe it's not the only Latin that we're interested in, but it's still probably for most of us the goal. Then we get this personal connection with them. We get to internalize them. We get to think of jokes or situations that they're originally in and then use them for ourselves. And the great thing too is that if we consider the long and short syllables to be our guidebook for pronunciation, then we get, I think, the most important part, like ecclesiastical, classical, or the Germano-Slavic pronunciation of Latin. All of them are beautiful and they work really well. I think that for the literature, though, which is the thing that we're most after, it could be really valuable to follow that metrical pattern that's in all the language, in both the prose and the poetry. And we'll become better readers of poetry, and then you start to see that, like something like huka desu, it's very colloquial. And there's a lot of colloquial stuff that's in the literature. So that's the reciprocal relationship that I see in this. I'm making some more audiobooks, pedagogical audiobooks that will be teaching this in the future. But I think that if you take this idea and put it in practice, it might be of use. So thank you very much. Any questions? Sir?
Thank you, that was great. I'm curious, I have heard that Australian English observes vowel.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if anyone else has ever heard that, and if you think that practicing a really good Australian accent might be a way.
I know a few outstanding speakers of Latin and ancient Greek who are Australian, actually, there's a lot of great classes that's coming out of there. This, instead, we actually, even in British English, for example, like saying cost instead of cast, for example, or even our father, that fa, that is usually long in American English, longer. We do have these a little bit more in British English and definitely in Australian English in different situations. And it is phonemic in the sense that it's like the difference between and is something that is important, that it just doesn't sound right to that, at least in those dialects.
I've heard that, for instance, in Australian there are several words that are the same. So like a ferry that takes you across the river.
How is it?
A ferry that flies through the air and grants.
Maybe ferry and fairy, I don't know. Yeah, one's longer.
Ferry.
Maybe the flying
In Australian
mythological.
English are distinguished by
Yeah.
the length of the vowel.
That's awesome. And those exist too in English. The problem, I'd say, with using any English, or even German, which has this too, as a model, is because it's relatively infrequent. And we can definitely use it to show our students if this is something we're passionate about as teachers, to show them, hey, this is something that exists, hey, in our language too. The problem is that you don't get it in a lot of the unaccented syllables. And there's so many longs and shorts in Latin, and stressed syllables and unstressed syllables. So many times a stressed syllable is short, an unstressed syllable is long. And if you're looking for models that are very much like that, Finnish, Japanese, Czech, do that. Thank you for the question.
Can you quickly comment on Orpheus and Symmes?
Oh yeah, because I had actually corrected it, and I did it. That one, this is why I skipped it. But this didn't update to the more recent PowerPoint. I would make the eus long, which is what I wanted to correct. What did you want to say about it?
just in terms of the context where this appears.
Oh, it's the two great poets in their natural habitat, if you will. And it reminded me of this exact thing, because the Darmak and Jalad at Tanagra, it's talking about two companions who were forced to stay together in the episode. So this idea, just sort of this, it's more generic, like Orpeo sin si Luis. I can imagine poet friends of mine, if they're in their element, just making beautiful poetry. I think Orpeo sin si Luis and Inter dal pi Nasarion. So that's sort of the image that I have for that. That's what I would use that for. Sure.
I think we're out of time, so we should probably give another hand for Luke.